Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 134th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those watching on video, you'll see at the bottom of the screen we have a guest, Alan Kinson. Hello, Alan.
Morning, Frank. Morning, Stan.
Morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll explain how we know Alan and the sort of jobs he does and how it's all linked into education. And he's had a very special week this week, so some very exciting news to share. So how are you, Stan?
Good. Obviously not had the week that Alan's had, but
No.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a for me it's been a week around trains and transport and things like that. Some other work I'm involved in with the Northern Powers Partnership. We've heard today, problems on Transpennine trains and also HS2. So that's taken up a bit of my thinking at the moment. So because these affect teachers and children as well, in terms of getting to and from school, all of these delays. So it's something that does affect the choices that older children have in terms of selecting courses at particular colleges, which they might have chosen, but they can't get there because the train service is rubbish. But anyway, let's move on.
I think HS2 is following the sort of economy airlines bit that we don't actually guarantee to take you to the airport you want or the station that you want. But we'll take you as near as we think is important.
Yes, I always think I went to school in Southend, and we used to enjoy watching these sort of planes fly into the airport, which used to fly to Ostend. And now, of course, Southend used to have a Southend London airport, but it did require you to get on a train and travel for about 55 minutes high speed to get into the centre of London. But it was called Southend London Airport. Anyway, so Alan, can you just sort of give a little sort of summary of the sorts of things you do and how we know each other and how you're involved in education now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've Frank and I have known each other now for about not far off 10 years. Yeah, I've been involved with schools, both primary schools and secondary schools. Coming from way back when my grown-up children were in school, and so I'm the proud father of three grown-up children. I became a member of a primary governing body, chaired that after a period of time, and then moved over to secondary and became a governor at the secondary school. Very, very different. I think it's sometimes where you move into either you have experience in one or the other, but when you move over, it is a bit of a shock. It is different, very different, especially with a large secondary school.
And particularly one that might be in an area with a lot of social challenges as well. The sorts of issues you can be, and I wouldn't say sort of tucked away in a secondary school in quite an affluent area. There are other challenges, but there's a sharp end of life, isn't there, sometimes in these schools?
Absolutely, there is. More recently, I am a sponsor governor now. So I joined, rejoined the co-op about 11 years ago. My background is in technology, and the role that I do now is it's quite a broad role. It's looking after the IT infrastructure that powers the co-op, whether that be a store, whether it be a warehouse, depot, a funeral care location, a cremation mortuary. It is quite a broad tech role, which I enjoy enormously. And Frank and I met about 10 years ago. Very, very early days of the Coop Academy's trust, and days of forming the Coop Academy's trust. So back at that time, I think we had three secondary academies, 4 primary academies. And the Coop Academy's trust is far, far larger than that today. But I've maintained my involvement. So Frank and I both worked over in Leeds for a while. I was chair of governors over in Leeds at the Coop Academy there, a high school that sits within an area which is, it is pretty much one of the highest areas for any type of local deprivation measure that you wish to take a look at. It is an extremely challenged school and demographic, and it's those schools that I've had most involvement with. I've never been on the academy, on the governing body of a school that sits in leafy suburbs with with relative wealth around. I've never sat on a governing body, and I probably wouldn't, because it's not something that I'm so keen on. But my interest is it is aligned to what we have at Co-op and what was there in 1860 when the Co-op was founded, on education. And some of the Co-op foundations were built on educating those Co-op members back hundreds of years ago, and giving them some simple ways in which they could make things better for themselves. And a lot of those values and principles run through what we do today as an academy. So so I sit as chair at the moment at one of our larger primary academies. It's Coop Academy Princeville over in Bradford. Was a 3 form of entry. It's now a 2 form of entry. And I really love working with the team there. We've got a fantastic head, a superb leadership team, and the start that we give to our people's education and journey there is excellent. Really enjoy working with that team.
Fabulous. Well, that's a nice start to the day, isn't it? Upbeat message there. Thank you for that, Alan. Sometimes we're not quite so upbeat, but it's really good. Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Just nicely linked with being a governor. An academy, AET Academy, that are now creating, going back on what they did when they first became an academy trust, which was virtually to remove parents from the role on local governing bodies, describing them as the parent equivalent of a playground bully.
Parents have described them.
Yeah, that was under the previous CEO, I think, and now they're looking at creating what I think they call them councils, not governing boards, but having on them 2 parents, up to 2 employees, a local authority representative, and 3 community representatives, which I think is really good. The idea is to tie them into the community better and have a feedback loop from the community. I just think they're still missing a point in that they don't want this group to have key responsibility for performance. And I just feel as though that, if you're not careful, all you're doing is creating a promoted PTA, a group of people who don't actually have a role, don't have any authority, but you can relate to them and say, oh yeah, but they do a lot. If you take what Alan was saying, if you had that theory that parents don't know enough to become chair of governors, etc., then Alan's a perfect example of somebody who does and can. And I think you can't put the whole group of parents into a box that says you're actually only interested in your own children's future. Some of us have a wider view than that, and some of us have experience that can help.
I think
it's a good move.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way that governance structures and arrangements have shifted. Since the multi-academy trust world was created, in pre those days, before that, there was a very clear standard format. The local authority setups were very similar, whereas now there is a sort of greater flexibility around how that works. And actually, I'm sort of like, I still wedded to a particular model, but actually, I should open myself a little bit more to other options that are available. I think one of the things we spoke about before was about the role of the head teacher or the principal, and whether they should be a sort of a governor. Whether they should have a vote, I suppose, is the issue. And I've always
I
took a view.
always felt as a head that I shouldn't be on the governing body. I should report to the governing body, and that would separate our roles to a point where I knew that my job was to implement whatever the governor's strategic view was, even though clearly a lot of the strategic view is done by the school and approved by the governors.
Yeah, and led by the head.
Yeah.
Steered.
Well, our head of governor services when I was in Lancashire always used to say, show me a good head and I'll show you a good governing body.
Yeah.
And the two interrelate.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I would take a view that good head
reporting to governors feels a bit better than being part of a governing body. I don't know.
A good head teacher, I'll bring Alan in now, but for me, a good head teacher is keen to develop its chair and its governing body, and vice versa. It's not a one-way street. I mean, have you found that, Alan?
Yeah, I think what I've seen in both in our trust and in other trusts, the schemes of delegation have changed over the last 2 to 3 years. The title of the governing body of lots of schools has changed. So we now use Academy Governing Council. And the scheme of delegation that we've implemented, I wouldn't go as far as to say it necessarily weakens the role that the governing body has, but it's certainly changed it. And I've always been willing, and something with our scheme of delegation, we worked a long time on this. We collaborated with the whole trust, and we spent about 9 months actually deciding between ourselves and making sure that we'd got that scheme of delegation right, that we understand where the CEO fits in, where the trust board sits in, where the AGC sits in, their roles and responsibilities. And what we've implemented at the co-op seems to be working. But I've also seen the scheme of delegation go way, way too far. And the governing council is no longer responsible for performance. Why on earth would we be there if we weren't, seeking performance improvement?
Yeah. I think it was interesting. One of the greatest things I think the thing I was particularly proud about was when the Coop Academy's trust, we didn't apply to the National Governors Association regarding outstanding governance. One of the schools, the Stoke Academy, did, and because they were linked into a trust, they couldn't make that application for themselves. So the trust suddenly was in a position where it was being examined in terms of its structures. And I think for me, the lovely thing that came out of that review, which was undertaken by the NGA, was that sort of a sense of how the role of the senior officers like you, Alan, in the co-op, that what they were contributing in a broader sense, so their understanding of how governance works in the business was leaning on their expectations about how the local governing body or how the trust board should function, and making it feel much more professional, and a much more challenging environment, I think, also for the CEO. I certainly felt that. And it was really, and those trusts that are not linked in the way that, we have the sponsorship arrangement. But for me, that governance side of it is something that I think is a major pillar in the success of the trust and actually securing its future as well. It also acts as a sort of like a safeguard as well. Somebody outside of the trust who's actually, in a sense, it's part of, but it's outside of, who's actually looking at the best interests of the entire trust. So I think it's in a fortunate position. I always felt fortunate to have the co-op wrapped around me. So what's caught your eye this week, Alan? On a similar, it's as if it's all planned. It's a theme running through this week.
It is. I mean, it's a story that I picked up on earlier on in the week. and I managed to have a look through and spoke to a couple of colleagues about this. But one of our primary academies had the opportunity to visit GCHQ in their offices in Manchester, in Heron House, and yeah, the day was quite. We had quite a large number of pupils on the visit, and the idea of the day, it was structured, and we had a series of workshops where our children were doing sort of spy tests, doing all sorts of puzzles and skills, and it was absolutely fantastic. They were so well engaged, but also coinciding with with the visit was King Charles III, that attended,
Wow.
and attended for quite a good chunk of one of the workshops. And I think it was great to see the engagement and the engagement with pupils, uh, with King Charles. You could see that he was um, deeply involved and interested in the work in which the young pupils were able to demonstrate and show. And he was hugely impressed with the capabilities of our children at that age, that were absolutely flying through some of the tests, and they absolutely loved it. And I think also that the staff also that went over there on the day, to work with the children and work through the workshops. And I think they got to appreciate, some of the sense of humor that King Charles has. And I'm no massive royalist, but the work that Charles does in these areas, you can only you can have admiration for. But the way he engaged with the children, and had some fantastic conversations with the teachers, where he was replaying back some of the the conversations that he'd had with the children, and they're in absolute stitches. There's a great photograph with King Charles. He's got his head bent over, his hand over his mouth, and they were they were doubled up laughing. It was so it was really, really good. And I think you whether it's relevant, I don't know, but sometimes being part of a larger academy's trust, you tend to get reach, I think. And
I agree.
sometimes
Yeah.
you tend to get those engagement opportunities and those collaboration opportunities, that they come easier than it would do for a smaller academy chain, or a local educational authority school.
I remember Steve Morell's the former CEO of the Co-op, went to a dinner, and there was an auction at the end of the dinner, and he bid for a day's visit to the Graphene Centre in
Wow,
Manchester. And I remember we took students from all of the, what were then, I think, 5 secondary academies. And we spent the entire day at the Graphene Centre with the Nobel Prize winner and his team. And that whole opportunity came about because of Steve's presence at that event, his willingness to actually bid for the opportunity for the children. And I have to say, I suppose in a sense what happened about that visit was that it forget the children to some extent, but it opened my eyes as to what the needs of business were, and what the opportunities at the Graphene Centre, and the way it drew other researchers and other businesses into that corridor at Manchester University. And how important it is to be located there, and for schools to also be connected in some shape or form with that. So the visit of GCHQ by New Islington pupils is part of that connectivity, isn't it, to ensure that the teachers understand what the future looks like. Because if you say to the vast majority of teachers, what do they do at GCHQ? I think the majority of people would have a fairly vague idea of what it was, I mean, they need to have a good understanding in order to adapt the curriculum to meet the needs, the growing needs of these jobs that are
Yeah,
that are coming their way. They've got a
absolutely.
chance to do that.
There's a lot to be said, Frank. When certainly when I was, I think I just became a head. I'd done a lot of work as a deputy with working with industry, but a lot of that was not necessarily taking children into workplaces, but taking staff and spending 2 weeks. I mean, I think I spent a week with Ferrantes was in Manchester at the time, and I learned so much
Yeah,
about what they did, and then the first thing you're doing is doing something with the children that links to that workplace, and I just don't think those opportunities are there now as they were at that point.
yeah.
We
I
have
mean,
so many links with so many different businesses, whether it was retail with Marks and Spencers, the paper mill at Stubbing, and they were working with us, and they were releasing staff to come and work with children in school as well.
yeah, I think
All of which was really
I had
great.
I had a week working for Smurfit Corrugated in Warrington, and spent half that week trying to build a sort of system that would locate the pallets that they were losing. And I thought at the time, what the hell is all this about? But of course, it was really, really helpful in terms of developing my understanding about systems, about the sort of different leadership styles that were being adopted there, and also the pressure that the plant manager was under from head office in terms of delivery. And that was at a time when I don't think there was any Ofsteds going on. I'm pretty certain there weren't. So this idea of a real accountability, bearing down on you, was something that I still recall. But yeah, I mean, for me, my visit, I went to Blackpool this week. I went to visit a guy called Mark, who is the relatively new computing lead at Blackpool and Fylde College. Blackpool and Fylde College were one of the first colleges to run a digital T level, and I went to see how this was established about 18 months ago, and I was keen to get a better understanding of how it was going. And I have to say it was a very, very positive meeting, and I was really struck by some of the things that Mark was saying, where he's tried to demystify some of the stuff around digital. I mean, Alan, I mean, we joked before, but there are some really peculiar job titles, I think, in the world of digital. My son is a UX developer, and they use the word sort of like, they use the word sort of like people that sort of construct stuff, and they're sort of architects, when in fact
Absolutely.
you don't
Yeah.
see them as an architect, or but Mark's very keen to sort of demystify that for parents primarily, and to create a program where the young people come on to experience a very broad range of opportunities when they first start, so that they don't actually in effect pick their next stage of the course until they have a better understanding of what the world of digital actually involves, because they have programs there which are more down your line, the infrastructure stuff and the bits of systems that keep the show on the road. And they also have the other wing of it, whereas there's the more of the sort of like the development side of it around the product design and that sort of stuff. And he was finding that children were going down one arm and really ought to have been in the other arm, and he's trying to create that. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is, and the positive bit of it, is that as part of the T levels, you need to do a very long placement with a business. And he was telling me that 50% of the students who have been placed have either accepted or have been offered a job in the business where they've been accommodated. And for an area like Blackpool, that is really fantastic, because it means that students could actually just do the first year or the second year of the program and not actually go through to doing the degree. They can pick that up later, but actually they can actually gain a qualification and get a job straight away in a local business. So it's a very, very positive story. The downside to it, if there is one, is all the stuff that's currently going on for work experience, other apprenticeship opportunities. there's a real risk here that these sorts of opportunities could fall away as businesses focus in on these T levels. So it's a positive story, but we need to be mindful that business only has so much bandwidth, and actually we need to accommodate all of these needs in order to ensure that children do have an experience coming through school, which means that they can, choose the right course or choose the right career. And I think work experience and stuff like that goes a long way to helping bring children on. So I would hate to see all of the other stuff fall away because businesses focus in on the broadening range of T levels that are coming. So I've stopped there. So 3 minutes of me talking, but that's really what so well done, Mark, at Blackpool and Fylde College. It sounds and it looks really exciting.
It's fantastic. And just a point on that, Frank, from what the work that we're doing at Co-op as well, we introduced paid internships some time ago, and we did that because we were recognizing that many of our children found it very difficult to access the pathways that would get them into ultimately a tech arena, and talent was falling away. We were losing talent because we weren't providing the pathways. There is a massive shortage of talent in the tech sector in the UK. There really is. One of the things that we see as an employer is that when we bring applicants in for discussion, conversation, those pupils that have gone through some form of internship, some form of apprentice program at the age of 18, compared with so that their ability to come into the business to be productive and to add value at 18 is way greater than what you would get traditionally with a graduate coming in at 21. The graduate would come in, they would sit on a graduate program for 2 or 3 years, where they would learn the real stuff, and it's an expense and it's a lag before we can get talent productive. And we do see that those 18-year-olds that we are bringing in significant number hit the ground running, requiring very little immediate supervision, and then just with close collaboration and support, they absolutely fly.
Yeah,
they really fly.
It's interesting. I've mentioned here before that I was really proud to be host of a visit by Rachel Sylvester from the Times Education Commission when she went to Blackpool. And so we invited a couple of major businesses there, and we were talking about the need for there to be greater flexibility around the curriculum in order to meet the needs of, say, Blackpool, where we have a number of sort of large tech businesses who are struggling to get the staff. And one of the large businesses, I won't name them, but one of the large tech businesses was saying that, if you were to line up the 18-year-olds and the 21-year-olds, the 21-year-olds may come with a 2-1 in computer science. He said he would probably vouch for the 18-year-old to be easier to place within the business. And he was looking more at their aptitude, their behaviors, their willingness to learn, their enthusiasm. Whereas actually his view was that for some of the 21-year-olds, some of that, it's as if, well, I've got my certificate now, I've got my degree, it's your job now to find me a place. And the relationship between the employee and the business somehow has been affected by that 3 years of study at university. And that's, and it was stark, really. And I suppose the question for me,
interesting there, Frank, is all the things that you said that he would judge are all things that we don't report or judge in schools.
Yeah, I was going to come back to Alan on this.
Yeah, we just don't do that, do we? We don't measure it. We don't say, this is somebody who's particularly good at communication. This is somebody who works well in a team. None of that gets reported.
No. I mean, before I bring you in, Alan, there was another colleague who runs HR for, did run HR for a very big multinational in the north. based in the north, and she was clear that their business is interested in the kids that are not tremendously highly qualified, but are actually a little bit mouthy, who've got a bit of confidence, who can have a joke with somebody and whatever, and were personable. You know, they might not be the most academic, but they were young people that people wanted to be with because they were fun and positive. And she was saying that, you know, the basis of their sales force, those people have those sorts of interpersonal skills, you know, and so in effect, obviously they need to have a level of maths and English to get by, but actually those are not the prerequisites of it. It's about the character, about the individual. So I mean, how do you find it, Alan, in terms of security? You were saying that there's a shortage, but what are you looking for in future employees?
I think where we're focusing at the moment, and this is across all hires in tech. We've spent an awful amount of time, leaning into how do we attract a far broader range of potential colleagues to join the co-op, because traditionally when you start to craft roles, you craft their titles and the role and responsibility. If you take that away, what you would often see is that from a diversity and an inclusion perspective, it isn't hitting the mark. So we're not attracting from an entire pool of potentially fantastic colleagues because of the way in which we market ourselves, the way in which we advertise the role, the wording that we use. So tech tends to be male dominated, in leadership, in salary. We've done a superb piece of work that cuts across all recruitment in the co-op now, where we believe that we're authoring our roles such that we're getting some fantastic candidates from a far, far broader range of the community. So diversity and inclusion. But what we're also, in the situation whereby you will often have candidates for roles that you say are sort of a bit mouthy. The social skills are those social skills are perhaps not as strong in comparison with others. You might say that that there are some elements or behavioral traits in there, maybe of very light autism or ADHD. When you actually start to work with some that sit around that line, you start to tap into some fantastic different knowledge, ways of working. And that's what we're looking to do. We want to make sure that we're going to access to all of those children, potential employees that are different. And that's what that's what we look for. I want to see points of difference. I don't want to tick list a 21-year-old of I was captain of the rugby team, this sort of stuff. I want to know, what makes these people tick, what makes them different. When you start to have those conversations, you start to see capability just start to flow from them, and have a think in a different way, work in a different way, and that's what we want to see. When I bring in leaders into the co-op, I don't want to bring people in, who are an imprint of me. I want to bring the best I can. I want to learn from people, and I want those people that come in, to be far better than I at a majority of things. But I think sometimes the pathways become closed far too quickly for those students that are going to make absolutely phenomenal colleagues potentially working in the tech space. But we don't attract well enough.
No. I mean, I think I mean, this is a whole discussion for another program, I think, but because it actually gets to the heart of what are we actually teaching and how are we teaching, and in a way, my fear is that children quickly get a feeling that they're not able because they can't jump through some of the hoops that are set for them, which actually probably have very little bearing on their future lives, but shouldn't have any bearing on their future lives, but do, because they're viewed as very important staging posts, and that means that young people then sort of feel as though that they're not valued quite as much as others, and so for me, it's music to my ears, actually, Alan, hearing you talk about the efforts that are going in here to ensure that there's a broader range of people contributing to a big business like the Co-op, and I'm hearing others, as I mentioned before, about the large tech business in Blackpool, really wanting to know, well, what are these people like? What can they bring?
It's difficult to change the way schools work. To be able to, I'm always saying we should do more about the social skills, the individual, the character skills. But actually, I'm not sure how you would do it. It's very easy to say, well, it's okay. We've got subjects and we can measure subjects and we can say, 7A's, 7B, whatever, and that's relatively easy to do with the way schools are set up. To change that, to say we're actually going to talk about your character and we're going to do some kind of report to potential employees about who you are and what Alan said there, what makes you tick, is far, far more difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
And far more subjective, I would imagine.
I think, though, that schools, I've seen a lot of schools now, but there are some schools that actually are clearer about how they develop that character element, and the actions they take, and the opportunities they give young people to lead and to participate and to contribute to decisions that are being made. There are schools that are quite closed to the students, to the pupils, and there are others that we want to know how it feels. You help us make the experience better. And we have a view, you have a view, and that coming together, I think, is part of how we guide young people in terms of, the contribution they can make. In fact, it's interesting.
Something Alan said there, though, about other people want to be around and be with. We should be able to report that. I'm thinking now, children on outdoor education stuff, where you see their character far, far different than you see it in school. And there's somebody you see there who's not academic, but everybody on that particular team wants to listen to what they want to say, and they're clearly got some leadership qualities amongst their peers. But then they move on, and that understanding that person has some leadership qualities gets lost because there's no record of it. There's no passing that on.
We're going to stop it there, because actually we're getting into the negative bit, and we actually had some really positive stuff. So, Alan, we finish off each more recently. We finish off each chat with something that you would perhaps like to contribute or change to make improvement, in the education service generally. So, we don't know what you're going to say. So, what have you got in store for us?
Yeah, this is sort of not necessarily wanting to end on a negative, but I think what I've been doing some work. I won't mention the particular academy because of the nature of the conversations that I had, but I was asked to chair a governor's panel for an exclusion. It was at a primary school, and I think it was a very challenging couple of hours that we spent with parents. Parents were supremely engaged. However, the people, we just did not have a setting that was any more safe for this particular pupil. And the parents and the school had literally tried everything to make the partnership work. But it was, we had to make, unfortunately, the decision that because from a safety perspective, both for pupils and teachers, it wasn't the right setting. And what was interesting beyond that was in sort of multi-academy trusts, you don't tend to spend very much time collaborating and having conversations with the local education authority. So after we sort of finished our session, I asked the LEA lady to stay behind if she could, because I was really keen to have a conversation and understand some of the issues that were being faced. And I was absolutely staggered with the conversation that we had. As we sit here today, that this child still has no education provision, and this is at about 150 days after the date of exclusion.
Wow.
There is no alternative provision or specialist provision available within the area at all. There were 2 places that could have taken the pupil. Both were a 100-mile round trip on a coach. And we talked through all of the provision that had closed over this past 10 years. And I was absolutely shocked by the conversation that I had. And the LEA advisor was absolutely mortified to be having this conversation and having to explain to parents why there was still no education provision for the child. She desperately wanted to help and support. There just was no provision, and there still isn't. So if I could change something immediately, if I had the ability to just have the right people sat in the right place and the right number right at this moment in time, it would be to have local provision for those pupils with needs, so that those needs can be met and not just drop out of the education system at the age of 8. That's something that worries me greatly.
It's funny because again, I can reveal this because it is in the public domain, but in Blackpool, it's a very small local authority. We simply haven't got the resources to set up a range of provision. So obviously a lot of children have to go out of Blackpool in order to secure that provision. And so in a way, Blackpool's dependent on the provision that's provided primarily by Lancashire, which surrounds it, and other areas. But it is when you look at the costs that are being incurred for individual children to be housed or located, some of them on a residential basis from Monday through to Friday, and the impact of that on the budgets in Blackpool, it's because of being a small authority, you're always vulnerable to that. If you're a larger authority, there's a chance that you may have the provision within your control.
Frank, I did quite a bit of work on this at one point, and what I couldn't convince people was in exactly the thing you talk about in Blackpool there. So their costs are very high because their children are going outside. Then invest in something in Blackpool and make money from other authorities sending people in to pay for it. It's not sort of rocket science to say if we're spending. I mean, I was talking with some children, almost £1 million a child, the cost of the provision they were getting, and saying, in a big authority, you should be able to provide all those things, and if you can, then you can charge other authorities for children coming in, but they're not entrepreneurial local authorities.
No. Well, Alan, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're more than welcome.
It's lovely to see you again, and it's lovely to hear, because I'm not connected with the trust anymore, but to hear all this sort of positive stuff that's going on, it's really heartwarming, to be honest, to hear it and be connected with it again. And Stan, thank you very much. We're back again next week. I think it's on a slightly different day.
Thursday next week.
It is. We're going to be talking about Latin next week, Stan. So the
But
teaching of Latin.
I may well be coming from the summer house because I think we're having a carpet fitted that day.
I tell you, on these posher podcasts, they don't have those sorts of problems, Stan. But anyway, yeah. So anyway, thank you everybody for watching and listening, and we'll be back next week. Broadcast again. It'll be put up online on the Friday. So thank you, Alan, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.